Hello guys, how are you? So today I'm gonna discuss about how you can set HTTP cache control headers from Node server, and we'll also go through different scenarios of how browser actually caches static files. Let's get started. So here's an example which I'm running on localhost 3000, and this is basically a express server which is serving a static folder, and this is the website. It's a very basic website, has an image, has some styles and some content. So this is what is getting downloaded from the server. So this is the first call, which is the HTML call, and then the styles, and there are other assets like the JS files and all. So these are just very simple JavaScript and CSS file, nothing much in them. But we are mostly interested in how the browser is caching and how we can play around with the cache control headers that will be set in the response headers. So just to give you an example, if you go here in low-core, this file, you can see here I have set a cache control header of public and max edge 3600. So 3600 is actually in seconds, which means 60 into 60. So that is equivalent to 1 hour. So I'm telling the browser that cache this particular file for 1 hour. Similarly, all the static assets that are there are being cached for 1 hour. Okay, so this was the first load where you can see there are like 204 kilobytes of data being downloaded. Now let's refresh my page again, and I think my server is down, so let me start my server. Let me go ahead and say open in terminal. Let me go outside. Okay, so I'm in the root folder. Let me start my server and say node server.js. Okay, so the server starts at 3000, so I can go back and let's refresh this thing. All right, so now you can see this is being loaded from the cache. So there are 7 requests, and now you can see the actual size of the request is around 54.8 kilobytes, so which is much less. So the advantage of caching is clear here, that it will put or basically less stress on your main server, and whatever files are available in the browser cache, it will get those files from the cache. So your overall page load time will also be faster. And if I go and do a hard refresh, this again goes and fetches the files from the server. So you can see there's no files being loaded from the cache here, and again it's being downloading 204 kilobytes of data. Now let me just normal refresh my page, and you can see it's being downloaded from the memory cache. Okay, so there are two things here, disk cache and memory cache, so we'll talk about that. But let's go through the code once. So this is the server.js file. It's a simple Node Express server, so I'm requiring Express here and then listening at port 3000, and then this is the main root path. So although it doesn't make sense here because I'm already putting my entire public folder as a static folder, and my index.html file is actually inside the public folder. So as soon as I say that serve the static folder, which is the public folder, the index.html file is directly served by the static path. Okay, so here at the top you can see a few options that I have set for the caching. So this is supported by Express, and the options is passed as a second argument to express.static function call, so which goes as a middleware. So you can set here ETag there are different options which you can go and read in this link. I'll share this in the description box, but the main ones are ETag. So you have an ETag, I'll explain you in the browser. You can set a max age, so this is the value for 1 hour. So here inside the code in the Node server or Express server, we have to set it in milliseconds. So this many milliseconds is actually 1 hour. In the browser understands it in the seconds value, so it becomes 3600 seconds. These are other parameters that you can set. The other one, important one, is the headers, set headers. So this is a function where you can set more custom headers that you want. So this is just some headers in the response that I can set. So this is a custom header, and that's it. So once you start the server, it starts to serve the static files from the public folder. So this is my public folder here. So inside the public folder, this is the index.html, very simple HTML. It just has 2 script tags and then the CSS file and then the image here. So the image is going and sitting here, the CSS is going here. So this is a very simple CSS file, and then two JavaScript files. So this is my own script, which is some very simple log statements, and here is a load.s core file. So this was meant to mock the load.s library, but I've just written a very simple module here, nothing but it just has two properties here. This is a join function and a version property. So all this code will be shared with you on GitHub, so you can go ahead and try this out. And then inside my main script file, I'm calling that load.s module and then call it the join function and serving it to the browser. All right, so that's about it. Let me restart the server again and go back to my browser, do a hard refresh, and all these files are now downloading from the server, and 204 kilobytes of data being downloaded. If I go and see inside styles.css, so these are the headers that is being set by the Express server. So this is my cache control, public max edge 3600, so which is 1 hour, and this is the ETag which is being set. So this is a value which depends on the content hash or the content of the file. So if the contents of the file changes, it generates a new ETag. So this will be done automatically by server or the Express server. This is my custom header, if you remember, inside the code. So you can add as many headers you want, but of course it has to be meaningful headers, which is a standard HTTP header. Okay, so these are the headers that you see here, and even localhost. So in the main HTML file also, these are the headers. Similarly, all other files, the image file also has the same headers here, because the entire static, if I go back to my server.js, so the entire static public folder is being served. So all of them has the same HTML headers, or HTTP headers rather. So if I go and refresh it again, you will see it's being downloaded from the cache now. Okay, now let's play around with the values. So say this is 1 hour, and say I just reduce it to some other value and save the file and restart my server again so that it takes the changes, and go and hard refresh. Now let me go and see my static file. So it is now 360 seconds. So that is how many hours you will have to calculate. So basically I'm playing around with the value. So now I'm saying the browser, okay, cache it for this many hours or this many seconds. Now if I go and make this as 0, what happens? So I'm basically telling the browser that cache it for 0 seconds. That means don't cache it. So every time you fetch from the server. So I have restarted the server. Let me hard refresh and go back and see my header. So I'm saying max edge 0. So if I close this, so this was the first load, anyways it's downloaded from the server. Let me refresh it again. See here, there is no downloads from the cache, so it is again downloading everything from the server. Why? Because I have set a cache value of 0. So I'm telling the browser, okay, you cache it for 0 milliseconds. Basically you download every time from the server. So this doesn't make sense actually. There are other property values that you can set in the cache control, so which we'll look into it later. So let me go back to the 1 hour default, or 1 hour which I set earlier, restart my server and do a hard refresh so that it takes the new changes. Go back and see, now it's caching for 1 hour. Then go and refresh it. Now you see it downloads from the cache. Okay, now what about memory cache? And there's another type of cache called the disk cache. So memory cache is the browser in memory cache, and the disk cache is actually the cache which is on the hard disk. Now since this URL I've opened in the tab of this browser, so and it has all the files in the memory, so it is whenever I'm making a refresh, it gets those files from the memory cache. Now say if I close this browser tab and I go and open another tab, I go and open another tab and just open my dev tools and I put my URL again here. So let me go back to network panel. Now you see that it's being loaded from the disk cache. Why? Because I have shut down my previous tab, so it lost its memory cache. So whatever memory was there in the browser tab, it lost its memory, and then it downloaded the files from the disk cache, which is the hard disk. Still it's a part of the browser cache only. So still it is not going to the server and downloading the files, it's still loading from the cache. And you can see the data is still very low than the original data. Now let me refresh it again. Now you will see that the files are going from the memory, because when the browser new tab was launched, it cached the files in its memory, and now it's loading from the memory cache. So that's about the memory and the disk cache. Alright, so now let me, okay, there's one other thing is that normally how browser caches the file. So let me explain to you that. So when I do a hard refresh, let's say, so the first call that goes is for the HTML call. So this is always the first call, the root call. So you see here localhost 3000. So this is my root call. So it hits the server and it downloads the HTML to your browser. Now the browser starts parsing your HTML. So this is the HTML. So the browser starts parsing your HTML. So it finds a link here. So in the link I'm saying the browser, it's a style sheet. So it knows that, okay, there is a style sheet file and I need to go and download the style sheet. So then it starts the download of the style sheet file. So if you go in this request order, so you see the styles.css here, and this is the waterfall. So the first download is for the HTML, then it starts the CSS download. Okay, so now after the CSS is downloaded, it starts rendering the HTML here. So whatever HTML was there, so it starts showing the content. Then it finds an image tag, and then here it finds the URL of the image. Similarly, it finds the script tags, so and then finds the path of the JavaScript file. So now the browser goes ahead and starts downloading the JavaScript files, and then finally the image file. Now you may ask me a question like, in the HTML code, my image was actually on top of the JavaScript files. Now how and why did the HTML download happen at the last? This is because the browser considers styles and scripts to be more priority, or to have more priority than images. Image files are normally not render blocking in nature. So they are downloaded by the browser once the browser has bandwidth, and once it has rendered the page and it has parsed the JavaScript and all. So it goes ahead and downloads the HTML file. That is why these two JavaScript files are at the top. The CSS file on the other hand has the highest priority. So if you see the priority column here, this is the first HTML call which hits the server and brings back my HTML content. So this has the highest priority. Then the styles starts to download the styles. It also has the highest priority. Why? Because to show the content and on the browser page, it needs the CSS. So the first thing that it does is to download the CSS. Now these two JavaScript files, anyways, I have put at the bottom of the HTML body. So they have high priority, but they are not highest priority, because it renders the HTML first and then goes ahead and downloads the JavaScript file and then parses them. Okay, so that's about how the browser actually downloads and the resources from the server, and what is the order of download, and then how they actually cache in the browser cache. All right, so in order to explain you how the browser actually caches things and how you can bust that cache, I'll make a separate video with proper diagrams, and also you'll understand like how and what priority the resources are downloaded and how the browser is actually caching things. Now, so there's a thing that I told you about ETag. So the ETag here is generated by the express.js server automatically, and it depends on the content of your file. Now let's say I have this index page. Let's modify the HTML of the index page. So let's remove this particular h2 block that you see here, and let's see if the ETag is being modified by the server. So we'll talk about how and why ETags are important. So let me close this guy. Let me go to a new tab, and whatever ETag I copied, I'll just put it here so that we can compare. Okay, now back to the HTML page. Let me remove this block here and save this file. Just for the sake, let's start the server again and let's make a fresh call. So it downloads my first HTML and then the other resources. Now here's the ETag. Let's see if this matches or differences with the new ETag. So you see clearly those two ETags are actually different. They do not match because we changed the content of the file, and the ETags are different. Now Okay, so this is the state of the HTML file now, and this is my server. So I'm not doing anything, just go back and make a fresh call. And now let's see the etag. So what's the etag? Let me copy this and go back to my file, put my etag. Are these two etags same? Yeah, they are the same. Since I haven't modified anything in the index page, so the etag remains same. Now why etags are important? So let me close this, go back to the browser. So etag along with the cache control headers are being used by the browser to download or the files either from the server or uses the file from the cache. Now the etag is a random string or an alphanumeric string that is generated based on the content of the file that you have here. So if you go and see the JS file, you'll see the etag here. So all files will have their own etags, which is based on the content they have. Now using the etag, the browser can actually let's say once the file or the file has expired. So here I have set a cache of 1 hour. So after 1 hour, if the browser, we make a fresh call or we make a call from here in the browser, so after 1 hour the browser will actually look into its cache first. So it will see that okay, the file or the path of the file has expired, so it will go into the server and then it will make a request for the resource again. So it will carry the etag with it. So if you go to the so it will carry the etag with it, and then once the server sees the etag, so he will compare this etag with the etag on the server side, and then if the etag matches, that means there is no new changes in the file on the server. So now it will respond back to the browser saying that okay, the file that you have on your cache, although it has expired, but it's good to use because I do not have any new changes on my side. Now the browser goes ahead and downloads the or basically gets the file from the cache. So that is the etag. Okay, alright, so I hope you understand about etags now. Although this is a very brief description, I will prepare a better video. But let me come back to the index.html page or the root page, which is here. So let me make a fresh call here, and all these files are downloaded. Let me go ahead and refresh. Now you see here the CSS, JavaScript, image, these files are being loaded from the memory cache. But if you see the index page, which is the root page, it's always downloading from the server. So although it has a max age public cache control header here, but it still goes ahead and downloads the file from the server. This is because this is the root page. So and like whenever the URL is being requested here, so if you go and see the base URL, so whenever I'm requesting the base URL, this is the base URL, so whenever I'm requesting that base URL, it's hitting the server and then it's getting the content from the server. Okay, so but you can actually play around with the cache control header for the index page, and then either you can say the browser that don't cache it at all. So every time you download from the server, this is because sometimes you might have a problem with CDNs. So what happens is, say this is my server, so I've hosted on an EC2 instance, and in front of the EC2 instance I have put a CloudFront distribution. So now the first time the browser makes a call to the server, so it goes to the CDN. First it sees whether the files are there in the CDN. No, there's no files on the CDN because this is the first request. So it goes to the server and then brings the files from the server. So first the CDN will store the files on its side and then pass it on to the browser. So now the CDN, since we have mentioned that here it's public and max age 3600, so the CDN will also cache the files for 1 hour. Since this is public mentioned here, so public means the caching will be happening on both the CDN and the browser side. So you can mention private here, which means that the caching will happen only on the browser side. So since the CDN sometimes caches the index page, so this is my index page, so the first call to the server, so sometimes even though there are new changes in the index path or the index route, sometimes it serves the index page from the CDN. So in that case, that can be a problem. So why? Because the main server or the origin server might have new versions of these JavaScript and CSS files, but the CDN instead responds back with the old index page. So the user misses out on the new features. So we can play around with that. So if you go and see the Express server code, there is an option to do that. So first of all, so the options that I pass here, so the options that I pass here to my express.static function, so I can customize this. So let me go ahead and say that I don't want this right now, but instead I'll pass the entire custom header here. So I can say cache control, and I can go ahead and say public comma max age, and I can say 3600, which means for 1 hour. So let me refresh or restart my server, go back to my browser, do a fresh call. It's a hard reload, and it has downloaded the files. So let me go to the static CSS file, and okay, so it seems to be working. So this is public and this is for 1 hour. Now if I say private, just to test it out if it works, let me restart my server, do a hard refresh, and go back and open. Okay, so this is private now. This means cache only by the browser. The CDN will not cache this file. But since this particular code which I'm setting here is applied for all the files in the static folder, so everything will be private now. Everything. So if you go and see the image, it's private. It's private. Even the index page HTML is told as private. But we can actually customize this. So for example, let's say my index.html, so which is the root call, so I don't want it to cache. I want the file to be downloaded from my origin server every time, whereas these files, those scripts and style files, I want the browser to cache. So we can play around with that. So if you see here in the set headers function, there is a second parameter called path. So the path is actually the path of the file which are there inside the public folder and which is being served. So for that, let me go ahead and print the file path first, so you'll understand. So I'm printing the path here, and let me go ahead and make this to public, and let me restart my server. Okay, let's do a hard refresh, and let me go ahead and see my CSS file. So here okay, it's public again. This is 1 hour. We haven't changed the time. Now this is the log in the server side. So you see the paths, so all the paths are being printed here. So whatever static file was served, the path of that file is printed here. Okay, so now we can put a condition actually. So if this is an index page, we tell the browser don't cache it. If it is other files, you cache it. So for that, we can write a simple condition here. Okay, so we can say path is actually string, so we can say path.includes. So if it includes index.html in the path, do this, else do this. So else you go and cache it for 1 hour. Public means both the browser and the CDN. Now if it is an index page, we can say either no store. So no store means we are telling the browser don't cache it, so download it every time from the server. So let's test this. Restart the server. Okay, do a hard refresh, and let's go and open the HTML file. Okay, so here we say that cache control no store, so we are saying download it from the server every time. Download it from the origin server, not even the CDN. Now if I go to my CSS, okay, so I'm telling here that go ahead and cache it for 1 hour. The JavaScript file, go ahead and cache it for 1 hour. This file, it's again the JavaScript file, go ahead and cache it for 1 hour. So the asset, which is the image, is also cached for 1 hour. Okay, so that was the hard refresh. Now let's normal refresh it, and you can see these are being loaded from the cache. Whereas this particular file, although at the very beginning this was actually downloading from the original server, but then sometimes CDN distribution causes problems. So in that case, I can specifically say cache control no store, so that it downloads from my origin server every time. Okay, now there is another option that you can set here. Let me stop the server, and I can also say no cache, and I can in fact set a max age and say, let's say 3600 again, which is 1 hour. Okay, so let's refresh or restart my server. I'll explain you about no cache now. So let's restart my server, go back to the browser, do a hard refresh and see the HTML. Okay, so this is no cache. The other files, okay, so public, so cache it for 1 hour. So here, so I'm saying the browser no cache, but I'm also giving it a time. So what does no cache mean? No cache actually is little misleading. So no cache means that it doesn't tell the browser not to cache. It's actually telling the browser go ahead and cache the file. So you cache the file, but the next time when I refresh or the next time when I request for that file or want to load that file again, so before loading the file you consult with me. Me means the server. So the browser will actually consult with the server that if there is a new version of that file on the server side. So it does usually using the etag. So this is the etag, and if you see here, this is the etag which is going in the request headers. So the browser is sending the etag to the server. The server is checking the etag with the etag that is passed and then finding out, okay, the etag matches. If you see these two etag, these are actually matching etags. So the server finds, okay, these two etags are matching. So there's no new version of the file on my side. So it tells the browser, okay, you are good to go. So use it from your cache because I don't have a new version of my file. So that's how this works. So when you can also set no cache, and this is the maximum cache limit time that you can set. So what happens after 1 hour? So say after 1 hour when my cache expires, so when I do a refresh here, so anyways it will first look for the file in the cache. Since it has already expired, it will go to the server and then bring back the new file. So but then it is also sending the etag here, so it goes ahead and takes the etag element. The server can actually compare with the etag. If there is no change in the etag, it will tell the browser, since there is no change, there's no new version of the file on my side, you can safely go ahead and use the cached version on your side. So the browser then gets the file from the cache. So you can play around with no cache, no store, and public and private. So there are 4 properties for cache control header. So public, if I set public here, which is public I've given for the other files. So public means cache will be happening on both sides, on the browser side as well as the CDN side. You can specify something as private. So private means cache only by the browsers. You can set something like no cache, which means actually cache the file, but before using the file from your cache, consult with the server. And then you can also say no store. So no store means you never cache the file, so every time you download it from the server. So when you say no store, you don't specify the time because it will be downloading from the server. So let me go back to my default values. Okay, all right, so is there anything else? Let me just recall. So I think I have spoken about how the caching happens on the browser side and what are the priorities in which the files are downloaded, and how you can set cache control headers in a Node Express server, and how the browser is actually caching these files, and what is memory cache, what is disk cache, and how you can play around with the values, and what is max age, and what are the different properties that you can specify, like public, private, no cache, no store, and what else. I think that's pretty much it. So this is just a short simple video on understanding how you can create a simple Node Express server to test the cache control response headers and play around with the caching. I'll prepare a better video with proper diagrams, and I'll also write a blog post on how the browser and CDN cache actually happens. And the most important part is how you can burst the cache. What is bursting? So say for example, here I am actually telling the browser cache the file for 1 hour. Now let's say it has cached the file for 1 hour, and it's now loading the files from the cache every time I make a request to the server again. But meanwhile, within the 1 hour period, say there is an important fix that I rolled out, and that important fix is now sitting on my server. But that fix which is there on the load as core file is not in the browser side. Of course, the user has to download the file from the server first. But then every time he goes and refreshes or makes a call to the website again, So he gets it from the cache because his file has not expired. So in that case, how do I ensure that he gets the new fix which is there on the server? So that is known as busting. So we usually have techniques such as renaming the file, or in case of React and Webpack, it adds a content hash to the file name, so that there is a difference in the file name and it actually goes and downloads from the server. So we'll talk about the cache busting techniques, how you can cache bust on the browser side as well as the CDN side in a new video. So I hope this video has been useful and it makes some sense to you. And yeah, until then, have a good day. I'll see you soon.